Good. How are you, mate?
Good, good. Those little technical issues there were nervy for a moment, but we got through it. We got through
Yeah.
it.
Just 2 minutes
Um,
late, but we're all right.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. Just keep the crowd waiting. That's what it's all about. Um, so, mate, um, what's going on? You're where are you based?
Paducah, Kentucky, but work in Murray, Kentucky. It's about a 45-minute commute every day, which I actually quite enjoy. But so yeah, so we've been here now got here December of last year, so we've been about 8 months now.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about. Let's probably start with. Give me a rundown of what your role is now, because you changed jobs recently, didn't you? You got a new role coming out of kind of the last 12 months, was it?
Yeah, so I was at Briarcliff in Iowa for 3 years as a head coach in the NEIA. And we'll probably jump into this a little bit different, like the different leagues and stuff within the US collegiate system. But I was there as head coach for 3 years and then left in end of November, and then just took on this role with Murray State as an assistant. So it was a jump, going from a head coach to an assistant, but it's also a jump in level.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's almost like being, to put it in like football league terms, it's probably like being the head coach of Barnet, but then getting to be the Everton assistant.
Oh wow, big jump.
Yeah, I suppose it's the best comparison I could probably give it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the job now. So what you've obviously gone from head coach to assistant coach. What are your roles at the moment? What kind of is your day to day work that you do within that? Because by the way, and just a bit of context, like Paul, I know we've known each other a long time, but do you know the US collegiate system is something I don't know a great deal about. So having these conversations are really great for me because obviously I'm based in Canada, so I'm a little bit more north than you, but um, the collegiate system is something that we don't have a similar program structure as in England.
Yeah.
So the level was really interesting. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about the actual. Obviously you mentioned different levels there, but what's the role? What's the day to day job look like?
Yeah, I was chatting to him about it the other day, and I was like, making the transition from head coach and assistant coach. I felt like the reason I thought about this because I was just the best man at a wedding a couple of weeks ago. When you stood at the front, you don't know where to put your hands, and I kind of felt like that transition going from a head coach to an assistant. It was like at the beginning, where do I put my hands? Because I don't know how far's too far or if I'm being too standoffish. But the guy I work for was great. And my primary role is he kind of split it up, and this was new for me coming in as well. So he's split it up in like, we'll do training, and we'll both plan training. One may take the lead one day compared to the other, but primarily like my roles and responsibility are around the defending aspects of the team. But it's not it's not like if we're defending from the front, he'll take it because it's the attackers. But if it's defending in our defensive third, I'll take care of it and building out as well. But it's kind of a collaborative effort between the two of us. But then there's some things that it's been very coming in. The guy that I work for, Matt, just said to me, he was like, "You've got free reign of what you want to do." So just implementing a couple of things. So implemented individual development plans for the players, something that they'd never done before. Which they appreciated. I've taken a heavy role on scouting for our teams because
Okay, yeah,
one thing I do like about the collegiate environment is it's win at all costs. I mean, there is an area of development which I enjoy, but there's I love that preparation of preparing for a game to win on we play typically a Friday, Sunday. Again, that's an adjustment for me for where I just was, but preparing for those games to win those games. So I take a lot of my roles and responsibilities are kind of looking at the opposition and delving into that, and that takes up honestly a lot of my time. Looking at we have access to the film and stuff of the opposition and breaking it down, looking at their goals, where their assists come from, who the main players are, what times they score, what part of the body they score, what they had for breakfast 2 weeks ago. We're trying to figure out everything about like the opposition. That's something that I've taken a lead on and something that I love doing.
that's really interesting. Now, you mentioned the individual learning objectives or development plans. There's different terminology for the same kind of stuff. Um, that's quite new to a lot of coaches at grassroots level. So, can you talk us through maybe what the individual development methodology you do is, and what it looks like. And look, if there's trade secrets, then don't share them. But I know obviously it's quite common now in the English academy system. And it's now starting to filter out outside of the elite game into the grassroots game. What does it look like for you? Because I think you mentioned there that it's been really well received. I've seen the benefits of it in the academy system in England. So maybe we can give anyone tuning into this a little bit of insight on maybe how you start the process or the initial steps to implement it. What would it look like for you?
Yeah, so I've tried it two ways. The first time I ever tried it was a few years ago, and I got it from an English academy, like just from a partnership with a previous club. And we would tried doing it with like 8 and 9-year-olds, and figured out pretty early on that in the first meeting you have to have their, a parent or two there with them, because if you're asking an 8-year-old, what are you good at, and they're like skipping, they don't really have like an idea of like, and what do you need to go on and stuff. So that kind of initial conversation started with them. But with the collegiate environment, we have some compliance things that go with it, in terms of we have like periods where we're only allowed to work with the players a certain amount of times per week, because we're technically, amateur status. So we have that to deal with. So how it's working right now is we just had a last week. So we're kind of in that period right now where we're not allowed to work with them because it's the summer, because we're working with it technically still with the school system, and they're away on the summer and stuff. So we had a meeting, and I just ran through it of what the plan looked like, and I shared the template with the team. And I'm like, this isn't mandatory. This isn't something that is compulsory for you guys to do. If you want to do it, it's on you. So it's putting the ownership back on the player. Do you really want to do it? Like, do you want to get better? And we kind of do it from two standpoints. Like, I don't know how other people do it, whether they go, you either work on a strength or you work on a development area. I tend to do a bit of both. And typically the way that I've spoke to people is to review it every 6 weeks. But where we're in the collegiate environment, it's probably best to do it every 4 weeks, which probably isn't ideal. But it's we have to kind of, with our compliance issues, with the amount of games we get, because our season's going to run August, September, October, November if we're lucky.
Yeah.
And then we don't see them for a great deal. And we have said to them, listen, like, your development area might be this, and at the end of the 4 weeks, you want to continue it for the next 4 weeks, and that's fine. But they might have had a great 4 weeks, and they might want to move on to something else that they've seen. So I guess the big question is putting the ownership on the players.
So with that, and that's really interesting that you don't make it mandatory. Obviously, I think in the academy system in England, it is mandatory. It's part of the kind of rules and regulations under the governing body kind of infrastructure. You mentioned there about you do a development and a strength. Like, what makes you go with that way rather than two development tools? Is that something to give the players a bit of a boost, or is that just something you've seen in the past? What makes you do it that way?
Honestly, it was just something that I thought of the way that I sold it to the players. And I think there's a psychological aspect with it, especially. I'm not saying that women are more fragile than men, because I don't think that's the case at all. But the way that I've sold it and I guess anyone listening, I coach female players. But the way I look at it is going, right, I think sometimes it's hard for people, and I've found this in the last 6-7 years coaching females between 18 and 22, that they have a hard time sometimes recognizing what they do well. And they're kind of more pessimistic. And again, I'm not saying that's everyone, but that's a general kind of statement. And I just say, right, let's figure something you're good at, and let's continue to sharpen that tool while we sharpen one that's maybe a little bit blunt, for a poor analogy, for lack of a better term. So let's increase one that you think you're good at, and make sure you continue to be good at it. And at the same time, we'll do one as well. And then we've had that conversation. Listen, at the end of the 4 weeks, you might want to continue with the strength for the next 4, or you might be happy with it and you want to now go to 2 development areas, or maybe you think you're good at this but still needs a little bit of work, and that's kind of the reason behind it.
Yeah. So something that intrigues me is, when we do these development plans, how do we measure them? Do you make them kind of numbers-based assessment, or is it an observational thing? How subjective, how objective is how can you sit there on week 4 with a player and say, you've actually done better, you've improved, or you've not quite performed at the level with this objective? How do you manage that? Or and is it okay to be objective? Is it okay to be subjective? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I look at it two ways. Again, I think it comes down to the opinion of going, listen, we saw this. Did you see that? It's always easy if we both see the same thing, but they might go, well, I think I did really well. And we might go, not really. And again, that comes down to the opinion of us versus them, but some of them within their plans. And again, this with us being in a competitive environment, and one thing I've noticed being in the US is it's very stats driven. So a lot of them, so we've got a couple of meetings lined up in the next couple of weeks when they start filtering back in, and I know that some of them are coming in and they're going to be like, right, I want to score. We had some, I want to score 15 goals. I want to have this many goal involvements. I want to go, and some of them are being very long term about it. I want to go pro. I want to be the All Conference Awards, the All American Awards, the Player of the Year. They have those sorts of things. So that's on those types of things we can assess every 4 weeks. Where you wanted to get 15 goals, you're only at 2. We've got 7 games left. Do we need to reassess this? Did you maybe put too much pressure on yourself? Whatever. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers it or not.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And do you use video analysis within that? Do you use that as evidence when the players say, I don't know if that really was what happened? Is that something you use? You'll get clips of the game or training and say, well, look, this is the moment where we felt that you could have done this, but you didn't, or whatever it is. Is that part of the methodology as well?
Yeah, so we don't film training as much as we'd like. And again, I don't think we necessarily have the full staff for that. If we have one more staff member, I think we could get a lot out of that. But for games, we definitely do, and we revisit it. And it's something that we spent this summer revisiting the games we had last season, because we return all the players. So it's something we can look at. But then it's also talking to them within the flow of training as well. Like it could be, Sally, you came in on last Tuesday and you were talking that you want to switch the ball a little bit quicker. When you received it, then you were closed off. Maybe next time you open up on the half turn, you can get out a little bit quicker. So it's seeing it within the flow of the training and remembering it for each player. And I suppose that's the benefit of not making it mandatory. We've got 29 players, but in the spring we had, I think, at least 12 players do it.
Really?
I consider quite high, to be honest with you, because some of them just want to, and this is a lot of it for players in the collegiate system. This is their last 4 years of playing, because they'll be done and they're going to go work and their life, and some of them don't want to get bogged down in all the tiny aspects of it, and they just want to kind of, I want to play and I want to move on and be, I want to go be a doctor, nurse, vet, businesswoman, man, whatever it might be.
That's interesting. And the last bit, just around the development kind of structures that you do, you mentioned the relationship between the 4-week process, but also with their long-term goals. How much do you involve their long-term goals in your planning for the players? Are you very focused on the 4-week, or is there a connection to what they want to do long-term, be a professional player or whatever it might be? How much do you use their long-term aspirations in what you do?
It usually, honestly, is the focal point, because I just think it's a generational thing too. Is it a level of impatience? And sometimes when they're not, it could be little things like, I do want to score 10 goals. Well, you only scored 4. It doesn't matter. You've still got 3 years left. You've still got a long development cycle to go through. There's still time to catch up and reach these goals, because this is what you say you want to do 4 years from now, and this is where you're in after 4 weeks. So it's just keeping them on the kind of the straight and narrow of, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that's easier said than done. And we're kind of realizing that now as we're entering the season, that some people are already worried about. We went to camp last week, and one of the players worked it, and they're kind of worried about starting the first game, and they've already had a sniff from a professional club. I'm like, you're worrying about something in the next 2 weeks when something's already come knocking on your door that's going to maybe continue knocking on your door 2 years from now. So it's not, and it's honestly, a lot of it's just like talking through anxiety, like here and now, but channeling the long-term plan to talk them out of the here and now anxiety.
So there's a lot of kind of the mental, psychological aspects that you deal with within that environment as much as the technical, tactical.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's in the environment we're in with a collegiate, because they 18, 19, 20, 21. They've got boyfriends, girlfriends. They've got a full class schedule. We're traveling all the time. They're away from the classrooms. Now they're doing virtual learning. They're not getting the traditional. It's not all the time, but they're not maybe getting the. They're not. They're catching up online. Whereas another person who's just a student, not a student athlete, is getting that in time. And I think that causes anxiety and stress. Because they want to get. And I think the good thing is we've recruited good players that they're not just going to get like C's, get degrees. They want to get the best grade possible. So with that, there's pressure on it, and it's
the academic pressure as well.
Yeah, so we've done something where we're just trying to do it. And I've read this from actually Roy Hodgson as well. It's just like one of his things that he did throughout his whole career. I don't know if he's retired now or he's going to continue to do it. But one thing he tried to do is he tried to talk to every single player every day.
Each session, every day, yeah.
And that's something that I think is really important with our environment as well, because there's so many. They're not here just to play football, here to get a degree, and they're going to the gym, types of things that sometimes I think, especially when we're in the full flow of a season, it could be overwhelming for them. And it's just kind of being a support system for them as well.
That's really interesting, because from a coach development standpoint, we know we do our coaching qualifications, but now we're in the collegiate system. You're saying there's the whole holistic aspect of the entire experience for the players. As coaches, you've got to manage the environment, the psychological aspect, as much as teaching them how to play in their formation and which style of play you want to do. So I think that's a great one for coaches that maybe aspire to go and work at the collegiate level. Is the technical, tactical is, of course, it's important, but actually there's such a broader education needed or expertise needed for college coaches. So I think that's a really powerful message. Paul, you mentioned a few times from the role you do to some of the things in the day-to-day kind of involvement around recruitment. Actually, prior to the stream, we've had a couple of people put in some questions that they wanted to ask. And I'm just going to bring one up on screen, because this is one that, and it's one actually that I'm familiar with, where I work here in Canada, working with players that they're not of the college age yet, but they're starting to think about how do they get from where they are to a college opportunity. So what does the recruitment process look like? What does how do players get recruited into the college system?
Yeah, it's great, and it's going to be quite a broad answer too, because I think each college coach has a different philosophy in terms of where they get players from. Some coaches will be like, this is my area, like in terms of if they're in. So you see a lot of California universities, they typically recruit their players from California because it's a good hotbed for players. They may venture into Nevada, they may venture up north to Oregon, Washington. But the way to do it is, I think, club events, especially so I kind of break this down a little bit, domestic and then international.
Okay.
So on the domestic side is getting to showcases, because these showcases, there's an event going on right now in San Diego. It's called Surf Cup. And it brings in teams from all over the US and coaches. I mean, as a college coach, if you can go and recruit in San Diego for 3 days, you're going to do it. You can go and recruit. You can go watch a handful of games from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Then you can go get dinner on the beach. I love it. Can't knock it at all. So there's that. So you'll go and watch those games. And I think if you're involved in a club, you need to put a little bit of not pressure, but pressure on your club and say, listen, can we get to these events? Some clubs will hold ID camps where they'll invite college coaches in. So that's another thing. But then also colleges. We've done 2 this summer. They're ID camps. So we invite players in and they will come and, train with us for a couple of days.
Yeah.
I suppose to break it down, is your club going to showcases? Are they putting on ID camps at the club, or are they pushing their players to ID camps around? Because the coaching world's really small. Like the club coaches know the college coaches and everything like that. And then what the player can do individually is have film. And I think that the biggest thing I think for them is to have highlights, have a 6 to 8 minute highlight of everything. Yeah. But then also the full game in their back pocket, because what will happen? We do this. We want to go out and see the players in their environment,
Of course.
and if we never see them, they send 6 to 8 clip. We go, okay, that's good. Now we see a full game, because then we can start to pick things. Your highlights should never be bad. So can we see in the full game? They might have been in the highlights. They could be hiding things that we might be able to see, but we might be hiding things where we can go. We can work around that. We can fix that. So that's something I think the player can do on their own. On the international front, again, I think teams in Canada, can make it to the showcases in the US, providing they have teams and everything. So that's kind of different. And Mexico's probably in that kind of category as well. But then from like the European countries, Australia and all those other countries, a lot of those players depend on agencies to get them over. And I actually used one when I came over to play, but I don't necessarily think that you need them. I think if you do your research or know someone, what you'd have to do is the same thing. Have a highlight film. Break down your academics of what they look like, your GCSEs or whatever your country's system is, so it's easily converted into an American GPA that you take either the ACT or the SAT, which is the standardized test that universities look for acceptance. And then I think the biggest thing is once a coach can see film, a lot of the stuff that the agency does becomes irrelevant, because as soon as we see a good player from overseas, we'll just talk to the player. We're not necessarily a lot of the time interested in talking to the agency, because it becomes about the player at that point and what they can do. So if you're a player and you can get film and send it out to as many coaches as possible, you'd be saving yourself, 2,000-3,000 of what these agencies are charging to be a consultant to get you out to the US.
To effectively be the middle process of that relationship.
Yeah.
I imagine as well, and I'm quite naive with the official rules and regulations in the collegiate system. Is there a real strict kind of set of rules from the governing bodies about how you recruit? Is it? And I'm just thinking from players' point of view. Can they? We see it in the professional game. Can players end up maybe getting false processes, like maybe those fake agencies that recruit players for high fees that end up never doing anything? And is it a secure system, or can there be loopholes where players can end up losing a lot of money, or what's the rule structure for that?
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little bit muddy, I guess, in terms of, so I'm trying to explain here. So when I was at Briarcliff, they were part of the NEIA, and the compliance things they're a little looser.
Right.
Little things like I could go and watch a player in their environment, like them, speak to them and say, do you want to come visit campus? They'll fly in to or drive wherever they might be to the campus.
Yeah.
They can train in our environment. We can host them, feed them, and everything like that. And there's nothing against it. But where I'm at now, where I'm in the NCAA, we can still do that, but it has to be official. So that we have to pay for it. And it can only be 48 hours long. So I'm going through right now, and I need to take it. I'm going through a recruiting exam. So it's all the do's and don'ts that you can't do it. And it's intense. It's really intense.
Say that again, Paul. There's a recruitment exam for the staff.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so
what's that look like?
So it's a 30-question test, and you've got to get 80% to pass. Otherwise, you have to wait 30 days before you can retake it. And I don't know. I think it's good for 18 months. It's anywhere from 12, 18, or 24 months that it's good for, where you have to do it. Some of the rules and regulations change. But to go back to your question of like players, so like and this will come down to the coach and the school. So if I signed a player, say for instance I was going to sign you, and I said,
there's a conversation in that one.
Yeah, so I'm going to sign you. I don't know if I want to sign you after I sent you the program. You have me on the bench, but if I signed you and I said, right, I'm going to give you 100% of your tuition is going to be paid for, and day 2 in training you blew your knee out. For me, I honour it.
Yeah,
because that's not your fault. But there is schools that will go, right, you're no use to me now, I'm taking your money.
No way.
So But I think so. And again, I don't know what it looks like. I think you might be good for a year. So then the next year, so if you were promised 100% tuition and then I pulled it from you, for the second year you've got to pay full sticker price, which could be 25 grand.
Wow.
But at that point, you see players transfer, or you see international players go home.
Yeah.
But that sounds really dark, and it does happen, but I don't think it happens as much as you think.
Right. Fair. Interesting. And I'm conscious, I don't want to keep you all day here, but so that's your kind of current role now.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your journey from when you used to be a player of mine. I was doing my A license and I took a non-league job at a club called Whitchurch United, and you were one of the players. I put you on the bench occasionally, and so when you were playing, what at that stage did you have ideas about coaching? Is it something you were real conscious about, or is it something that just actually came to you without it being part of the master plan for Paul Cox? What started you off on the coaching journey?
Yeah. I always liked the idea of, I mean, at 16, 17, just playing football, that's all I wanted to do. It was the only thing I would say I was somewhat good at. And then I remember coming over to the US in 2008, and just remember there was one day, I think it was the second year I was there, and we were warming up, and we were sat down doing static stretches, which I don't think is a thing anymore, but we were just there, we were stretching. I remember just looking at my coach and I'm thinking, this is your job. Like, you do this for a living. I'm like, in my head, I remember it so well. Like, I could go back to the same field, sit on the same spot, and know where I was when I thought about it. And I was just like, I'd love to do that for a year. That was my thought process. And then I got done with the 4 years at the university that I was at in Nebraska, and I went home for a year. And I was 22, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think that the American dream of playing and studying, it was like a big 4 year holiday, to be honest with you. And then I worked in a sales job for 8 months.
You did get your degree though, didn't you? It was a holiday that gave you a degree.
Did give me a degree, yeah.
Good, good, yeah. Let's just clarify that.
So after I was in those 8 months, and it was during that time I thought, playing's done. I knew that I wasn't going to go any further than playing half decent standard on Saturday, 3 o'clock. I've got to figure out what I want to do in my life, really. And it was at that point I knew that I wanted to stay within football. And I was like, you know what? I think originally I wanted to go on the business side of the game, but then I just realised, like, I want to coach. I felt like, I think it all when I talk about it now, I look back at my first growth spurt. I used to be the quickest, fittest kid, and at 13 I went through a brutal growth spurt, and I was the slowest kid and never recovered. So I think then from like 14 to about 22, when I finally stopped playing, I feel like I got quicker here than with my feet, because I had to. And I think that kind of then helped a little bit on the coaching front. So then I started it out. So when I first gave it a go, it was in 2013. So I've been doing it for 8 years now, but I used a similar thing. And this is a way for, if there's British coaches that have a degree and still want to maybe come over to the US to coach, this would be their way in. Is I did a graduate assistant position. So it's basically a scholarship. So a playing scholarship, but for coaching. So I was a graduate assistant for the Midland Universities where I went. So I was the assistant coach. So I worked as the assistant coach for 2 years, but they paid for my master's degree. So that was my payment. So it paid for my master's degree, my apartment, and then my food, my meals at the cafeteria. Yeah. And then there was a little stipend of money as well each month. So your expenses are taken care of. You're not earning money, but it was a free master's. It was 2 years.
But you haven't got much outgoing costs either, have you?
Right. So it worked out. In the summer, I remember working for a team and earned a decent amount of money in the summer, which basically then covered me for that second year. And that's kind of how it went about. And then after that, it just kind of, that give me the whole desire to be a coach.
Yeah. Interesting. And again, I think that the English college system, or as we know it, the university system, is much more professionalised now as it maybe was previously. But that view of going to America and playing and studying, It's such a great opportunity, and it's great. I love that you went there as a player, done your scholarship, and then you have forged now a coaching career out of it. There's a kind of a couple of questions that came in prior as well, Paul, and the terminology was very similar. The questions were a little bit different, but I'm going to bring it up now. And just when we talk about pathways and maybe progressions, a lot of coaches I know, we've had this conversation, I had a couple of emails coming as well, is should grassroots coaches prioritise the B licence, the A licence, and if you want to go into the professional, the pro licence as well, or should the age appropriate courses be something that they prioritise? So maybe whether that's might be a little bit different from the age group you coach at now because you're at young adults, but maybe if you were working with say 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds, where would, and again I'm sure this is a subjective view in terms of this is what we believe individually, but where would you sit on this one? What would you recommend?
I'm actually currently doing my B license right now.
Okay, interesting.
With US soccer, and it's a great question. I'll be honest with you, where I sit today, as of right now, I think they should do age appropriate courses because that's what you're doing. And again, it depends where your long term goals are. So we talk about for players, coach, what's your individual development plan as a coach and what you want to do. But if you're going to be a grassroots coach, I think it's good to understand your age group and what you're going to do. And I think that there's always been a thing for me, like you go, oh, B license, A license, it sounds really good. Like it has that real like strong appeal.
Yeah.
But does it attain to what you're doing? Is what you're going to learn on a B license for, I don't know, an 18-year-old? So the age group's working right now for the B license is 13 to 18 into college. Okay, if you're coaching, is that really relevant for you? Is that sometimes I feel like the licensing is for the coach rather than the players. They want to be like, this is what I have.
Yeah, the prestige of it, the credibility of it.
And I think we've had a conversation about it before. And I know great coaches that have no licenses, but I know some coaches that have licenses that aren't as good as the coach that doesn't have licenses.
Yeah. I say that myself. You know, I do have the UEFA Pro license, but I see level 1 coaches delivering excellent sessions with 8-year-olds that I couldn't coach because it's not my expertise and it's not my experience. And so who's the better coach? Those kids are having a great time. They're learning. They're in a great environment. They're in a safe environment. They're developing an absolute love of the game. So I'm with you. Just because there's a level of qualification, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a better coach or that person's a better coach. So I think that's really important. One of the things you said there. Now, we've got a mutual friend and contact in the game, Andy Martino, works at Southampton Football Club. Something that always impressed me with Andy, back in the day, and we're talking like Luke Shaw would have been 9 or 10 years old, and I think he's like 24 or something now. So we're talking like 12, 13 years ago. Andy was the first coach I met who said, I want to be the best small-sided age group coach. Whereas at the time, there were so many people like, I want to be the first team manager, or I want to be the youth team coach under 18s. And this was even before age-appropriate courses come out. So does that kind of validate what you said there, Paul, about the grassroots? Is like, if you think you're going to be around that age group for a long, sustained period of time, take the age-appropriate courses, because they're going to give you even greater skills, knowledge, experience, and understanding of working with humans that age group in the environment of soccer. Is Andy a great example of that for you?
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because I was going to bring something up about that too. Because we were, so Southampton started this global thing in the US, a partner with clubs, and I remember they did a conference out here, and it was Martin Hunter, who's not there with the club anymore, but he was a technical director in the under 23s. Yeah. And I remember sitting in a presentation of his, and I was just in awe of the stuff he was saying. I was like, this is great. This really applies to, the older teams that I coach and the college team that I coach. And I was like, this is really great stuff. And then we get back to the hotel, and there's kids running around with some of the younger teams. And he said, he goes, I couldn't do that. He goes, he can manage the under 23s. He was like, but he couldn't do. He like openly admitted, he was like, I can't coach the 9s and 10-year-olds. And that got me thinking. I'm like, I think Andy's like spot on and going, I want to be the best in this age group, and he's very, very good at what he does.
Yeah,
But then
outstanding. Yeah,
and it's good to see people at the other end of going with Martin. He was like, I can do under 23s, I can do that, and he was really good at that. But he's like, I couldn't do that, and I just found that interesting. But it's the same thing. Like, so then on that standpoint, take the professional side out of it. Is there any point? Say which they were just grassroots. Martin and Andy were grassroots coaches. Take the Southampton connection out of it.
Yeah.
If Martin's not going to be an under 9s coach, would he do an under 9s course? He should be doing an under 23s course. And same for Andy.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be more emphasis on that too. And I thought that on my first license out over here, and again, US Soccer's changed it, but I did an E license, which is now the grassroots course, but it was designed around 9s and 10-year-olds. And at that time, I wasn't coaching 9s and 10-year-olds. So it just felt like I was doing a course to take the next step on the ladder.
So really then grassroots coaches need to start thinking about, if they're not doing it already, they need to not necessarily get drawn to, this is the steps you take through a coaching pathway, but actually it's more about them. Where are you coaching? Who are you coaching? What's your aspirations to coach? And you should pick your learning journey according to that, rather than level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and etc. So, and again, I'm currently learning more about the US coach education system, but here in Canada, they've now introduced age-appropriate licenses, and I think that's such a forward-thinking move to really give grassroots coaches more tools in their toolbox for the job they're doing. I'm sure that US soccer might be similar, but yeah, I'm with you. I think the age-appropriate stuff and know the age groups you're working with is really important. I'm intrigued. Can you explain a little bit more about that relationship you had with Southampton? I think Andy that was his role as well, the global kind of director of it. How did that help you as a coach? And obviously, you were part of that Southampton learning ecosystem. How did that? Obviously, it probably helped your club and the players within the club, but you as an individual coach, getting that distance learning from Southampton, how did that influence you?
Honestly, massively, to be quite honest with you, because to go back to the first coaching job I had, like I think I did learn a lot in my first assistant position, but it wasn't the experience I wanted. To be honest with you, I don't think that I learned that much. I think if you go into something and say I didn't learn anything, then you went in with a closed mind, and I don't want to say that I did that. Learned something. That was like for 2 years, and then I went away for a summer with a team and learned a lot. And I always say this: I probably learned more in those 2-3 months than I did with the 3 years that 2-3 years that I was with the university at the time.
Yeah.
Then from that point, I took over this club. So there was a small club, and they were looking for a director of coaching, and I was just like, I'll go for it. So I went for it, and it was just kind of like, I didn't tell the club this, but I was cacking it because I was like, I've never run a club. I don't know what it was kind of just like learning I was going. Yeah. And at the same time I was taking over, Southampton started the global partnership, the global program. So I met them at the coaching convention. I think it was in California or Baltimore, or one of these courses. And I met with them, sat down with them, and then kind of spoke to the club, and we kind of merged it all together. But it was without that, it helped me so much in like planning things and moving the club forward and learning. So that for me, that was such a big development area for me as a coach, learning and asking questions. Because at the time, I was asking a lot of questions. It could vary from under 9s, 10s to 13s, 14s. But I knew that the environment I'm in now, so they had all the stuff for the 18s through 23s, which was irrelevant to the club, but selfishly relevant for me. So I'd still ask about it. If I stay with that club, I had long-term plans of implementing an under 23 team and everything like that. So that was kind of the angle. But that really helped me just understand little things. It's where I picked up the individual development plan, simplifying principles of play, and basically simplifying the game a little bit. I think one thing I've learned in the last 2-3 years is just I felt like there was a lot of anxiety to know everything, and there's not. And it's just that kind of simplified that this is our curriculum, this is our philosophy, this is our way of doing things. And you look at it and go, I'm not saying it's simple because obviously it's a Premier League club, but you there, mate?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
The camera went off. I thought I was talking to myself.
I was doing the zoom in for you, mate. I wanted to go for that cinematic feel when you come into your punchline.
Gotcha. I thought I was just boring you to death.
No, you don't
So
do that.
so then it was at that point going, you know what? And it helped me just it helped me on a personal basis of philosophy and zoning it in of this is what I believe and this is what I do, and it's something that I've taken a lot from it and added things as I'm going along. And it's a process. I think as a coach, you can't I'm going to stick to these attacking, these defending principles. This is how I'm dealing with, excuse me, like psychology things, mental aspects of the game, because it's
Yeah.
evolving and adapting time, and there's that kind of fear of being stale. So, and I think this is a good thing that you're doing, mate, with this type of thing. It helps coaches interact, and it helps people to think differently, and help evolve philosophy and thinking of coaching all the time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think you're such a great example because your methodology, your mindset, and actually some of the principles that you know the behaviours and the decisions you make. There's so much geared towards, and you alluded to it earlier, like that journey to becoming the professional coach, the first team manager. You know, getting that A license, maybe even the pro license. And we've got this huge community of grassroots coaches working outside of the professional game, and I think sometimes we're underserved. I think there's so much about the bright lights of that professional level when actually there's some incredible people working in our environment. There's some unbelievable opportunities, um, and sometimes I think the industry, the education community, devalues, or devalues might not be a fair word, but doesn't do enough, doesn't shine the light enough. So um, these things are really important. I think I really love it. Linking on to what you said, and you can imagine this is quite a common question. I get this for most of the lives or podcasts that I do, and it could be a challenging question for you. But what's the best piece of advice you were ever given that has influenced your coaching career, or the best pieces of advice? You might have two or three where you're like, do you know what, these two, three things that coach, that person, my mum or whoever said to me has really held true. What would be? Is there any defining pieces that you can remember? Like, yeah, I appreciate that. That was good.
Yeah, I think my dad always said to me, he was like, you get, and this is so, I don't know if it's cliche or it's so simple. It's just like you get out what you put in.
Yeah.
And it takes you back to my first, actually my only head coaching job I've had in the college environment here. I inherited a team of 9 players in January, and a typical college team is about 25 to 35.
Okay.
And a lot of teams it finished their recruiting, and the player pool was very limited, and the season started in 7 months. So it was kind of just like, I've only got 9, didn't have a goalkeeper. But I think the easy way to look at it, go, oh, there's not enough time. We'll get a few in, and we'll just get by for the season.
Yeah.
And that kind of then that piece of advice is like, you get out what you put in. So if I'm just going to go, if my mindset's now going to be, I'm okay with it, or do I knuckle down and work hard? Brought in 22 players, and then the next year brought in another, because the goal was to win the league. So the next year, and again, this is a little bit different at grassroots, but in the environment I was in, the goal was to win the league. So the next year I brought in 19, and then the year after that, we only needed like 8 or 9. But from that moment, from January 2018 to November 2020, we won the league. And I don't think that it's because I'm this amazing coach, because I'm not. I think that it all stemmed from hard work, because I got out what I put in. So I don't think there hasn't ever been. So whenever people say, "Is there what kind of is the secret to that success?" It's just old-fashioned hard work.
What's really good is you didn't just say, "Oh yeah, you get out what you put in." You've actually given like an example, and there's probably a ton more where you're like, "Yeah, I could sit here, I could do this, I could do the minimum, I could do or I can really push deep into this and put loads of effort in and get the reward." So I think that's a really good. I think it's great in any walk of life, and I think when you look at some of the best people around at whatever level, I think they're just relentless in their work ethic and their the work they do, the effort they put into it, the commitment they put into it. So I think that's a great one. Anything else anyone's ever, and I'm not fishing, by the way, for you to say anything I've ever told you. This isn't a, go on, Paul, drop my name in, will you? You,
Well,
anyone else or anything, or have you seen anybody in what they do and you're like, because we all know coaches are the biggest thieves. Have you seen any coaches where you're like, do you know what? Well, I love the way they did that. I love the way they communicated to that player. I'm going to have that. It might not be
I,
something they fed you, but it might be something you observed.
yeah. So I think as a couple, and I'll give you one. I'll give you a couple that you give me that you did. There's one when, and there was another
I
thing that
wasn't
helped.
fishing. I wasn't fishing.
I know, but it got me thinking. So like so going back to winning the league in November of last year, it all started March of last year when COVID hit, and we kind of brought the
Yeah.
team together. We started doing some mentoring, and there was two. You said there was one was desk it, shelf it, bin it. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
If it's,
Yeah. Do you want to explain it a little bit? Just because it might not be
if it,
familiar for people.
yeah. So the important stuff's on the desk. I'm going to work on that. That gets my full attention right now. There's some things that you don't need it, so we're going to chuck it away. And there's some things that's still important, but it's not important right now, so you shelf it and you'll come back to it later. And
Yeah.
that's what I've really done. And I'll tell you the other thing I've done as well, and from a conversation we've had, I think it was a conversation we had. It was to do with social media.
Yeah.
I think it's bogged down, and Twitter's bad for it in terms of like code. And again, I'm all for sharing ideas, but sometimes I think there's a different angle and agenda to it, and I don't particularly like it. So one thing I've started to do is unfollow, mute, and
Powerful. Yeah.
nothing against people. I just like you have to be, because sometimes it's for your own well-being.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation we had. And then another thing that I've kind of incorporated was a plan, do, review. That really,
Yeah.
that's helped me massively in the last 12 to 18 months and everything.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes the day where we're doing training, so we train 5 days a week. Sometimes the office work can get ahead of you, and you don't plan the best session.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there was some time, and they're kind of like, right, I'm going to try and plan majority of the sessions at the beginning of the week and then review them because like I said, I got that 45-minute journey home. So that was kind of my review time, and obviously the doing was the training. So that really helped me. And me and the head coach here, we carpool every day, so we review every
Okay.
day.
Wow.
So that helps us massively, and especially if we both have young families, it kind of helps us a little bit digest the day. So when we get home, we can have some good family time. And that brings me to the other thing. When I did my C license over here, that one of the guys said, I think it was a great piece of advice. He was like, your best team's the one at home. And he was talking about family and everything like that. And I thought,
Wow.
when I
Yeah.
really thought about it, I thought it was really good advice. If you lose a game in our environment, again, if you're losing an under-8 game, you should get over it, because they're developing their kids. They should, hope they're having fun. Sometimes in the environment we're at, you lose and you're like, oh, well, a couple more of these might lose my job or whatever. But getting home to your family is a really important thing. And it's just like, especially in our coaching world, where the hours are unconventional from your 9 to 5. So, someone's always said like your spouse is someone who's so important that they understand
Yeah.
the doing it. And that's something that really, it's your support system as a coach that you can't take it for granted that you do. I mean, for example, I won't tell her this. Tiff's birthday is on September
She's
5th.
watching.
But
I've seen
yeah,
she's watching, so be careful.
I'm going to miss her birthday because I'm in Miami for 2 games. I mean, I feel bad, but I don't feel bad because I'm in Miami. But
Yeah.
it's little things like that where you've got to go, you know what? This is part of the job. Like you're away. It's not as bad where you're away for Christmas and things like that, but you are taken away from, some big life aspects.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about that aspect because I wouldn't say I learned that the hard way, but I went into that professional academy environment and I was very driven to succeed in there. And probably a journey of maybe 16, 17 years of I kind of focused on the career. And with all due respect, I you know, I distance myself from relationships, whether that's family or partners, and um, only now do I realise the value of that support mechanism at home and the relationship I'm in with my fiance. And she's incredible. She gets that football isn't a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday thing. She knows there's going to be disruptive weekends. Birthdays might have to be deferred for a week, or like planned to have a birthday but celebrate it 2 months time. Um, she moved to China to come and live with me, and that was because of a job opportunity. Um, and only now, kind of 20 years in, do I really see the value of the advice that you were given on that C license about your best team is the one at home. And it's pivotal. It's so important. So some people learn it early. You might get some good advice on the course. People like me, I was blinkers on and head down and really pushing into my career. And now I've kind of reached the peak of the mountain, and now I see things very differently, and I see the value of the work-life balance. And actually now I realise it actually makes me do better work. Whereas
Yeah.
before, I think I would burn out. I would never switch off. I was up early. I was to bed late. I overlooked meals. I didn't have the social connection, or the that connection away from the game. All of my conversations were around the job, around football, around coaching, and not that it was detrimental to me in health wise, but the balance was it was off balance. And
Yeah.
now I've done this, things are like life is much better. I live in a great place. I've got a great partner, great family around me, some real important friends, and I didn't really see that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was like, I want to be the best coach I can be. I want to achieve these objectives in my professional career. So really valuable, that one, massive, massive. I'm going to finish off with I think maybe about 5-10 minutes. I try to keep these to about an hour long.
Yeah.
What do you do about your future planning for Paul Cox? And you've already alluded to, you're a head coach at this level, and you've stepped up a level to go and be an assistant coach. I had quite a clear plan in that professional phase of my life. And I'm not saying you have to have it, but what do you do? Are you someone that, like, I do an annual review, and at the end of the year we'll look again to plan the next year? Or are you like, 10 years time, I'm working my way towards that point, that destination on the map? What does the future? How do you manage your own future? Do you manage your own future? And this is coaching. This isn't with the family. Naturally, you're going to do it with the family. But what do you do in your professional career?
Honestly, it's something that I've been reviewing a lot lately, and trying to figure out. And we just obviously got a 1-year-old, so that's changed a lot of things. I think the big thing for me is making this step up. It's a step up in terms of just like perception. I think if I change as a coach, yes, no, but still doing the thing, I still believe in everything like that, and it's been quite well received with the players and everything like that. So I think from both standards, been with that. The thing that I think I've realised in the last 9 months I've been here is that I want to be a head coach at the college level. That's what I want to do. And it's nothing that being an assistant I don't like. It's just not me. I like to be the decision maker. I like to be the person that makes the final decision. I like to be the go-to person. That's just who I am. With that said, I feel very lucky to have learned that where I am, because I took a gamble by coming here. But the guy that I work for is another English guy. He's great. He's given me free reign. He's been absolutely brilliant, and we've been very open with each other about we've become very good friends. Like when we see each other every day. We drive to and from work together, and we kind of share like our own aspirations of what that might be. So I think ultimately that the first step is to become head coach again within the environment, and then the next thing is the thing that's important for me is location and where that might be. And it could be a number of places. It could be closer to Nebraska, where Tiff's family's from, or we've kind of earmarked, Oregon or Colorado or a state like that where we want to be.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is having a kid now. And I know we said like obviously that it factors into it, but I don't want to keep moving every 5 years.
Yeah, fair.
I want them to grow up somewhere where they can there's that level of like assurance that that's where they're going to grow up and everything like that. So that plays in a factor to me as well. But I've never ruled. The other thing too is I'd never like close anything. And I've spoken to you about this before, and I don't think it will happen, but I'd never rule out going back home. And I know I understand the conversation. So I went home, 2 weeks ago for a wedding. That's when I sent you the picture of the program. Danny
Yeah, yeah,
Pollard played in that team as
yeah,
well. He was
yeah,
20. And I was chatting to my mum, and she was like, if it goes, she said, if you ever decided to come home, she was like, I'd try and talk you out of it. And I was like, well, I wouldn't come home for anything. I'd only come home for the right thing. So I'm
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Um, it's I'm open to everything, but I think it long term, next 5-10 years, would like to be a head coach within a collegiate team in a
Yeah.
location and would be there for the next 20 years.
Yeah. Do you know what I think for any aspiring coach that wants to forge a career in the game at whichever level, I think what's really good with what you said, Paul, is that geography thing. I think a lot of the time we maybe undervalue ourselves and maybe point to the journey, the first stage. Maybe you do have to go somewhere to get your foot in the door, get that first job in the game. But once you're established and like yourself now, you're building up your credibility, you've got great experience in the bank, you actually can be quite selective on, well, actually, this is the destination. I always knew I wanted to work in North America. I had a taste of it early in my career with a relationship Southampton had with a coaching organisation in the States. And I went there for a couple of years on and off, and I loved it. So I always knew I was going to come. And so then you start to, I guess you start to manufacture. Sounds a bit negative, but you manufacture your networks. You pinpoint direction towards club relationships. I've come over the US coaching conference. We obviously got we hooked up there in Philadelphia. We obviously knew each other from before, but the networks I made in that, I wish I did that 10-15 years sooner. So I think coaches can be quite geography orientated, and we would love to be in that area, that city, that demographic, and take those slow steps. So I think you're a great example of that mindset, that you can influence it. You don't have to. You don't have to just be reliant on where's the next job going to be. And okay, I don't really want to move to the other side of Canada, but that's where the job is. It's like, no, you can kind of take your time, be patient, and work towards creating the right opportunities where you want to be. And I don't think there's a stronger reason than you want your daughter to grow up in an environment that she's familiar with, long-term friends, that side of things. So I think that's another great example of the work and life balance and influence. So I just see we got Philippe come in. So just a quick shout out to Philippe. Thanks for joining us, Philippe. We are at the back end, so really apologies. It's nothing you said or did. Encourage you to come back. So I'm always intrigued by how coaches plan their future.
Yeah.
No one ever kind of taught me about it. I set a plan out. I was a part-time coach in the academy at Southampton and working in the community, and I just wrote in 10 years. No, it wasn't 10 years. It was by the time I reached 40. I know I don't look 40, but I am over 40. I want to have achieved these things, and some were very. I wanted to have the A license. I wanted to be able to. I wanted to have done certain jobs. Academy director role as one. Hugh Jennings was the academy director at Southampton, and I learned so much from him, watching him work and how he operated. And the role of the academy director was something, and that was an objective. I had some visit some different organisations and clubs. That was an objective. So some were quite pass or fail, and others were just experiences. And I think by the time I reached 40, I'd hit all of them bar two. And one was to be fluent in Spanish, which I'm still learning, but it's been a slow process. And to get a degree, which is something that I actually I was on the pathway to start a master's degree, but then I got offered an opportunity in China that I just couldn't turn down. It was too much of a life opportunity, and that's now kind of delayed the degree process. So for me, and it was just honestly, it was just on a Word document. I just wrote this list things I want to do by the time I'm 40, and although I didn't put it on my fridge, and it's like I'm going to look at it every day, it was on my computer, and I did look at it regularly. And it's funny, it wasn't that it guided me every day, but I think indirectly it did guide me to do all of these things, which a couple I'm still aiming to do, but it's just past the 40th kind of deadline. And I love that there's many different ways that people can plan and be like, right, there's my future destination. This is what I want to get to. I had, by the time I'm 40, so it was like I just put like a stick in the ground and said, when I hit that point, this is where I want to be. So it wasn't one day, maybe when I'm 50, I want to be an academy director. So it's just, I think it's good. And I always love listening to coaches about how they kind of plan their future, or whether they do. And it's not that you have to. I've met some people that they're like, do you know what? I'm very present focused, and I'll see what doors open, what opportunities present themselves just by being in the moment and making sure if we're on a 4-month season, I'm going to have the best 4-month season. I'm going to, everything goes into that, and then we'll see if anything, and if not, we do it again. And they're actually in a great role, the coach that I'm thinking about. And it's a little bit different to the way I think, but it's not wrong. And I'm not right. I'm not wrong. They're not right. They're not wrong. And I think that's another big thing. And I know, Paul, I'm going to keep you over a little bit, but I think that's another big thing. I think when we start out on our coaching journeys, I think we get so much fed into us at times about what's right and what's wrong. And some things are right and wrong, like health and safety and the way you treat people and stuff. Like, I get that. But sometimes it's like, you don't coach that way. I'm going to throw this one out there. This could keep you for another hour. We've seen the change of coaching methodology from the old stop, stand still to now giving the players ownership, less coach intervention, let the players figure out the problem, let them come up with their own solutions. Some people will say you can only do the player problem solving ownership. And they'll be like, no, that's how you coach. That's how you coach. Stop, stand still. No, that's boring. That doesn't work. But yeah, I know coaches that are the opposite, and they're like, you mentioned Roy Hodgson earlier, and look, I've only seen Roy Hodgson in a couple of League Manager Association coach education days, and he was brilliant. He didn't give the players ownership to solve problems. He told them where to be, when to be, how to be, and I think Arrigo Sacchi, who was the AC Milan coach in the 80s when they dominated European football, and then obviously Fabio Capello followed in afterwards, he was very similar. And I think Roy Hodgson cited Sacchi as someone that was very influential in the way he coached. Some of the coaches that I speak to now, I don't know if they might have a bit of a breakdown watching those types of sessions. And it's this kind of the right way and the wrong way. And it's like, I think we have to tread careful as coaches that we believe there's a right way and a wrong way. Just in my personal opinion, because you can go into a club, Man United, you go into Man United in England, unbelievable environment, unbelievable people. Doesn't matter whether you think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is a good coach or not, or whether Van Gaal was a mess, or ignore all that. Internally in the club, the way they operate, phenomenal. And they've produced players. But then I went and visited West Ham several times when Tony Carr was the academy director, and they had players like Rio Ferdinand, Frank Lampard, Joe Cole, Michael Carrick, Jermaine Defoe, Glenn Johnson, these types coming through the academy. Very different feel to going in at Man United, different coaching environment. Man United are very less out intervention. They do let the players take more ownership, whereas West Ham's coaches, and I'm talking, in the last decade, about 10 years ago. But then West Ham the coaches were very vocal, very get in the session, stop. Like, if you're in this position, you need to think about that, and that. And if that player's there, you need to make that run. Both environments produced an incredible level of player, but both were very different. Yeah. And I think that's a big one for coaches. I don't know what you feel on that, Paul, but I think that's a big one for me as well. Is like, some things there is obviously a yes and a no in how you deal with players and what you do, but predominantly, for me, there's not a right or wrong. Not to put you on the spot, but where do you sit on that? What have you been? Did you get some of that when you were young? Did it affect you? Not that you're not young now, by the way, but when you were younger in your coaching journey.
Yeah, I think there's two things that come to mind when you say I'm with you. Like I think that's why we love the game, to be honest with you, because there's so many different ways to be successful. The game does develop, and I think you see a lot of it, honestly, in punditry from somebody like Roy Keane. Roy Keane will sit there in the Sky studio and he'll just batter players going, or and he kind of got on a, what's his name? Harry Kane. He goes, the one thing I don't see in Harry Kane is that he's not going to go and dig someone out. Is that part of the game now? You look at the way that Southgate did things, it was very like kind of, they all seemed to get along. It was very like kumbaya. So maybe digging people out in the old fashioned way of getting in their face, screwing at them doesn't work. So I mean, that's kind of in the team. But when I was a kid, I remember going to play for Newbury, and I remember playing for the coach, and he just was never satisfied. I was playing right midfield, and you'd cross it, and he'd be like, "No, penalty spot." You'd cross it maybe within about 2 millimeters away from the penalty spot, and it still wasn't good enough. It's like, what do I do to please this guy? And that's at 12, 13. But then you go into an environment. To be fair, growing up, it was always like that. But sometimes there was, not that we needed like recognition all the time, but you weren't constantly kind of getting battered about like what you were doing and things like that. Yeah. But that was one thing that stuck with me. And then the other thing too is when I left the school, and I suppose this is me just kind of like confirming to you that I'm this way. Having those 9 players, bringing in, by the time I got to my 3rd year, those 9 players, 8 of them are gone because they had graduated. 1 was left.
Yeah.
The team I had, all they had known at that university was me. We've just won the league, having only lost 1 game. So they thinking, it was a great year. And I've said to them, I was upset I was leaving. They were upset I was leaving. We just had a great year. But the thing I said as I was leaving, you have to be open to new ideas.
Yeah.
But the way that the new going to come in, it could be better than the way I did it. Or there could be the way he does defending, or she does. It's a he. If he does the way he does his defending, it might be better for you than it was for me. And that might be the way it is. But you have to have an open mind as players as well to do that and be open to it. And I hope that resonated with them. That the team's doing fine, but that was something I said as I was leaving, of just like the worst thing you can do, especially transitioning from coach to coach as a player, is say, "Well, this is how we used to do it." I think to a coach, because how you did it, but this is how we're going to do it now.
Yeah. I think that's great, and that, by the way, that's not just a coaching thing; that's a life thing. You know, that adaptability, that being. Change management is tough. It's tough. Got some stories about that in my past, and I think that's absolutely right. I like to use, and a few people, I think we might have spoken about this before. I like to use the toolbox analogy. Now, look, I'm not very good at DIY, so I might hammer this example. But in your toolbox, you're going to have a hammer, and you're probably going to use a hammer. You're definitely going to have a screwdriver, and you're going to use that regularly. But there's this weird-looking tool that I'm not really sure what it does. But you never know. I might need it. I might need it for one really big job, and that will be the only time I ever use it. But that could be such a pivotal, influential thing. And so I always think you can't exclude anything from the toolbox. And that's not necessarily, that can be anything. It can be methodology. It can be how you communicate. It can be what your touchline manner is. These things, I've really enjoyed the season we have here in Canada, the youth club that I work with. Yesterday we finished our summer season, our outdoor season, because obviously, as you know, here we are in Alberta, we're going to get that snow coming soon, and we're going to look like Narnia. So we then have to revert to go indoors. And I've been really intrigued by watching the opposition coaches and their touchline manner. And funny enough, if I took clips of all the games we played and the opposition coaches, you'd almost fill up the toolbox. You know, with the way they are. Some just sit down and leave the players completely to play. Some are very instructional, and others are they're very Q&A during the game, you know, and it's like, oh, interesting. So I always like to, although our experiences individually, what you've done in your career, Paul, influences of people like your dad or people you've played for, the coach at Newbury, experiences of the game, going to college, all those things I think shape what you prioritize in your own individual toolbox. And mine would be different, you know, but I think we have to have the same toolbox. We have to have a complete toolbox, but then it's our own values, experiences, beliefs that tell us which tools to use more often or less or whatever it might be. So I think you're right. I think being able to change and go from using this tool to that tool, or the demand of your players actually mean you have to use these things. Really, really, really pivotal for me. So yeah, I'm with you. I agree. I always love talking to you. I think you're so kind of open-minded. Sometimes you have conversations with coaches and they tell you that this is the way it is. Honestly, I'm telling you now, this is the way it is. If you don't do this, but whereas with you, we spoke about psychology, and I know you've got Jennifer Lace, who hopefully I'll get Jen to come on in the future. Because she's so heavy. She works at a club and she's so heavy. And although she's a psychologist, she works in the psychology aspect of the game. She doesn't, and I work with Jen at Burnley, she doesn't prioritise working with the players. She prioritises working with the coaches. And for you, at the time we had that conversation, I know you reached out to Jen and you did some stuff with her, with the group you had at the time. That's why I think I really enjoy our conversations. Obviously, we had the podcast before, and we have kind of meets and like Zoom meets or whatever you want to call them. And I think that's really, really powerful. That's your mindset. So you are based in the States. So if there's anyone that watches this back, and we got Philippe in Brazil, so it might be a challenge to come and watch Paul Cox coach in person, but I would actually encourage people to maybe reach out to Paul and ask some questions. And Paul's similar to me in the fact that he wants to help people. That's why he comes on the stream, why he did the podcast with me. Wants to share his journey to enable other coaches to maybe learn and maybe follow some good practice, but maybe avoid some. We all make mistakes and we all have hurdles. So I would encourage anybody globally, reach out to Paul. I'm sure he's probably on LinkedIn. Paul, is there any way people can kind of grab hold of you?
Yeah, Facebook really. Honestly, that'd be the best thing. Group, just have a friend and go from there. Like I have LinkedIn, but I do a terrible job of.
Well, I'll make sure you're tagged on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on these. So anyone that does come back and watch these in the future, I'll make sure your profile's tagged on it. And just to reach out. And one of the biggest things for me has always been like whether it's remotely through like Zoom or something, connecting with coaches, or whether it's going to see them in person. Anybody that might be near to where you are, get in the car, reach out to Paul. Obviously, speak to Paul first. Don't just turn up, but reach out to Paul and see if you can go and see what the environment's like. If you want to learn about the collegiate system, then reach out. I think it's really important that am I ever going to work in the collegiate system? You can never say never, but I don't think it's on my choice of my roadmap. But I want every one of my kids in the program that I coach to have the opportunity to go and get opportunities at collegiate level. So as a coach, I have to understand it, not for my career, but for their career. And that's my responsibility as a coach. So if anybody's in that boat where you work with players that are in North America or want to go to North America, and I think it's our responsibility to understand the environment, even if it's not an environment we particularly feel we'll coach in the future. So that's why it's good that I've got someone like you, Paul, with your brains and experience and knowledge and just your understanding of the North American collegiate system. So, hey, mate, we're on an hour and 15. I'm conscious that I'm taking you away from the most important team in your life. So I'm going to bring us to a close. Thanks so much for giving up your time today, Paul. I love it. I love our chit chats. Apologies that you go to Danny's wedding and he gives you a team sheet when I was your manager and you're on the bench. I'm sure I started you in games as well.
He was on the bench as well, so it was all right.
That's double trouble. Do you know what? And in the future, I'll talk about that spell I had at Whitchurch, because it was for me a license. It was to help me pass my A license. I learned so much. I made so many mistakes. I tried so many good things as well, and I learned from it. Say again, mate?
Putting me on the bench was the number one mistake.
It was a challenge. It was a challenge to do that, yeah. I come from an academy environment. Anyway, I'll save that story for another day, and maybe I'll get you back on and we can talk about it from the manager's perspective and the player's perspective of trying to achieve something. But yeah, loads to talk on that experience. But yeah, mate, really appreciate it. Always love catching up with you. I hope Tiff and Frankie are good and everything's going well there. And we'll speak again soon, no doubt, mate.
Thanks for having me on, mate. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, and we'll touch base again soon.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm just going to wrap up the stream just by saying anybody that's currently tuned in or anybody that watches it in the future, the aim is to at the moment do one of these every month to get people like Paul to come on. Predominantly the last Sunday of every month. There's one or two for the rest of this year that might drop on a different Sunday. But the feedback I'm getting is really positive from people, so I might actually look to maybe bring it to every 2 weeks. But I'll keep people updated in there in whether it's in the Grassroots Coaches Facebook group that we've got or whether it's on the Global Soccer Education Facebook page. There is also, I release a weekly newsletter. So it's just, again, really focused on grassroots coaches. So not trying to say this is how you pass an A license or this is how you play out from the back in a 3-4-3 when you're playing against a 4-4-2. None of that stuff. I share coaching content, short videos that might be good for practice design, learning opportunities, webinars, stuff. I think actually Southampton have got some stuff going on with Andy Martino that I'll be sharing in the newsletter coming up. So if anyone's interested, there's a link at the bottom. It's just sendfox.com/GSE, which obviously is the shortened version of Global Soccer Education. And yeah, so keep an eye on those places, and I'll update you with who's going to be coming in at the end of what are we in now? We're in July. So for the one at the end of August, I'll keep you updated, and yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody then. So Paul, great to see you again. Take care, dude. Best wishes to all the family, and everybody else. If you're watching today, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. If you're watching in the future, whichever day of the week it is, have a great day. See you later, everybody.
See you, mate.
See you, Paul.